The URSA Cine 12K LF is a very exciting camera. It is Blackmagic at their most innovative, trying to push technology forward in the industry. And the result is one of the most interesting cameras we have covered on this channel. We've made a 10-minute overview video which covers the main points of the camera and shows off what it can do, the dynamic range, colors, very high frame rate at very high resolutions. The footage from this camera is something really quite special. So if you haven't watched that overview video, make sure you head over there first and watch that one, as that's where we're going to be discussing the main talking points of the camera, how it's different, how it fits in to the wider industry. Instead, this video is an in-depth look at the nitty-gritty details, a chance to answer some of the questions which came up from viewers of that overview video. As you'd expect, with a camera that does this many things, this differently, there is a lot to unpack here. So let's dive right in. Let's start by discussing the sensor, as this really is the heart of the camera and why it is so different from the rest of the industry. This is an evolution of the 12K RGBW Super 35mm sensor, which we first saw in the URSA Mini Pro 12K a few years ago. This RGBW design captures an image in a completely different way to other sensors on the market, which use what's called a Bayer pattern. This is a color filter array which uses twice as many green pixels than red or blue ones, and then uses a debayer process to actually build that final image again. This is how pretty much every single camera we sell creates its images. Blackmagic, though, have managed to build an RGBW sensor design. This uses an equal amount of red, green and blue pixels, and then adds white ones with no color dye, as that process loses a little bit of light capture. These white pixels capture luminance for dynamic range primarily. They haven't shared too many technical details beyond that on the specifics of how this works, but it's clear this has only been possible because of the level of control which they now have over the whole post-production workflow. They designed this sensor, they designed the codec with Blackmagic RAW, and they designed the editing software with DaVinci Resolve. And that's a level of control over the whole image workflow which no other company on the market has. This sensor design has some real strengths and advantages. Firstly, you can do in-camera scaling while recording a RAW format. Other cameras which record RAW can only use the full sensor resolution in their RAW modes. If you want a lower resolution RAW file, you have to crop in to that sensor. But here you can record 12K, 8K or 4K with minimal drop in quality, all in 12-bit Blackmagic RAW and no change in field of view. The second is that they seem to be able to pull the information off that sensor incredibly fast. This is what lets the camera do those crazy high levels of high frame rates and what gives it such impressive rolling shutter performance as well. Now let's look at some of those in practice. First, let's talk about the in-sensor scaling, as I think this is a massive deal for this camera and often easy actually for people to overlook. So I hear a lot of customers say that they just don't need 12K. And let's be honest, that's fair enough. Not many of us really do. If you don't need the 12K though, our advice would simply be ignore it and use 8K or 4K modes. Because of the in-camera scaling from the RGBW sensor, 8K and 4K are still the full sensor size, still 12-bit RAW and still very detailed. If you want to treat this as a 4K camera, you still get a really impressive 4K camera with all the other benefits of the URSA Cine platform. This is the same wide shot of this barn filmed in 12K, 8K and 4K. You can see a clear difference in detail when cropped right in, of course, but it's not as extreme as you would expect it to be. The 8K and 4K from this camera look really good. This is also the kind of shot which is quite prone to moire and aliasing problems, especially on those roof tiles, and there's none of that on any of these clips, so the OLPF is doing its job nicely. This is the camera side by side with the Pixis 6K for detail. And it's important to remember the Pixis is not a soft camera. Its 6K is lovely and detailed as you would expect. But here, next to the 12K, there's just no competition. This is a massive 600% crop, and the difference between the Pixis at 6K and the URSA Cine at 12K is just day and night. But what I find even more impressive than this is that when you swap the URSA Cine over to 8K, we still see a massive difference. Even when we drop down to 4K, it's hard to believe the footage on the right is now a lower resolution than that on the left. It does have a slightly sharpened feel to it now once we're this far cropped in, but side by side with actual 6K like this, it is more detailed. So even in 4K, the URSA Cine is capturing more detailed images than the Pixis. And like I said, it's not like that Pixis is a soft camera at all. Let's talk now about low light and high ISOs. And this is definitely a weak point for the camera. There's no dual native ISO. In fact, Blackmagic don't actually state what the native ISO is. The camera can go between ISO 125 and 3200. And as we can see here, the noise gradually increases as the ISO raises. Let's put this side by side with the Pixis 6K, which has a dual native ISO of 400 and 3200. At 3200, the URSA is definitely noisier. And what surprised me was that the noise profile is very, very different. It's much finer on the Pixis, despite it having the lower resolution sensor. This must be a result of that different RGBW sensor design. Both cameras do clean up excellently though, with just a bit of light noise reduction in Resolve. Another interesting note is that the noise doesn't change on the URSA Cine at different resolutions. 8K and 4K look exactly the same as the 12K here at 3200. Okay, dynamic range. In our overview video we showed this barn clip which got a lot of attention in the comments. So let's have a look in a bit more detail and include the waveforms so that you can see what's actually going on. Here's the log, and as you can see, nothing is clipped anywhere on that waveform. We don't have highlight recovery on here. If we apply the simple color space transform in Resolve from Blackmagic Gen 5 to DaVinci Intermediate and then to Rec 709, still nothing clips, but it places everything that's outside right up above 70 IRE. So if we lower the contrast, pull back those bright areas, you can see on the waveforms just how easy this was to do and how much information there is to play with. We also have another clip from a different angle in the same space. So let's do that same process with this clip as well. And this one's even harder because it's facing into the sun this way. Let's now have a look at some more controlled over and under exposure tests in our studio next to the Sony Venice 2 to see how they compare. And both cameras look great, as you would expect, but we do get an idea of how each sensor behaves once they really start to reach their breaking points. So the idea here is we overexpose and then underexpose the same basic scene on each camera, one stop at a time, and then correct the image back to look normal in post and see how the cameras are handling it. Here's our regular exposure on both cameras. And now let's move up a couple of steps to 3 stops over. Here both cameras start to clip very slightly in the bright area with similar amounts of data gone. Blackmagic has a tool though inside their RAW controls called Highlight Recovery. This uses information from any non-clipped channels, including those extra white pixels in the RGBW sensor design, to restore the clipped parts of the highlights. So let's go back to those 3 stops overexposed shots and turn Highlight Recovery on. And as you can see, there is a huge difference in the waveforms. It's doing a pretty excellent job of bringing back that information. Let's now jump 5 stops over for a bit more of an extreme example. Without Highlight Recovery, both are well and truly clipped now, but the faces still look great. The Venice does look a little bit more natural in those overexposed areas though, while the URSA has gone a bit green. Once Highlight Recovery is on, a huge amount of detail comes back. We can now completely see the plants again, while on the Venice, there is nothing you can do to bring back those areas. In underexposure, the Venice does still seem to have the edge. Both cameras shift their colours. URSA Cine seems to go a bit warm, while the Venice goes a bit green. but the noise is much finer on the Venice. If we add noise reduction, the URSA Cine cleans up very well though, arguably better than the Venice does. So both cameras are very impressive here. It does look like the Venice 2 has ever so slightly more latitude natively, but then once you use Blackmagic's highlight recovery tool, the URSA Cine just overtakes it with actually a decent amount more dynamic range. And the Venice 2, of course, has one of the most respected sensors on the market. That the URSA Cine can even come close to it is pretty impressive, let alone actually exceeding it in some ways like this. As an interesting side note before we move on, these tests obviously involved quite a bit of grading in Resolve. We're only using an M1 Ultra MacBook Pro, nothing state of the art, and although both codecs were quite slow with things like noise reduction particularly, the 12K from the URSA consistently actually played back smoother than the 8K XOCN from the Venice. Another big strength of this RGBW sensor design is its readout speeds at high resolutions. The URSA Cine 12K achieves 12 milliseconds at its slowest mode, which is 12K 3x2 open gate. It goes down to 9.7 milliseconds in 12K DCI and 5.4 milliseconds in 8K or 4K DCI. If we put this in perspective with other popular high-end cameras using CineD's independent test results, we can see just how impressive that is. In 8K, this is a faster sensor than the Alexa Mini LF or the Red Raptor. These fast readout speeds, combined of course with the cooling and extremely fast media, are what enabled the impressive high frame rate options on this camera. Here's the max which you can do in each sensor mode. But the main point here for me is just how high it can go in regular 17:9 DCI modes. 100 frames a second in 12K or 180 in 8K or 4K. That's a huge step up over anything else that's on the market. And all of these high frame rate options, no matter how high you go, can be done with any compression option. Yes, you can end up with some pretty crazy high data rates by doing this, so you will likely want to be on the 8:1 or 12:1 modes anyway. But the camera can do 12K, 100 frames a second at full 3:1 compression if you wanted to. This is all possible because of the new media module. Apart from the sensor, this is probably the area of the camera which Blackmagic have been the most bold or innovative with. It's also the area which I've seen the most misunderstanding and misinformation about. So let's try and clear some of that up, people, because this is a big change. And it does require a bit of a mentality shift with how you actually approach your workflow. So, out of the box, the camera doesn't have regular card slots, like, well, every other camera on the market. Instead, it actually ships with one of these, their new media modules. So this is 8 terabytes of extremely fast SSD storage. It's much faster than any regular camera media out there. And this media module is what enables the camera to do such crazy high resolutions and frame rates in 12-bit RAW without any compression option. It's a really crucial part of this camera. It's also fantastic that they include one of these with every camera. That's 8 terabytes of media that you just get free with the camera. So for many users, that's all they're gonna actually need. And it is a big, big cost saving for them. Even if you took the cheapest CF Express cards on the market, like these Angelbird SE cards, which are nowhere near as fast of course, 8 of those would set you back £1,600. Go for faster cards, like these Delkin black ones, and it would be nearly £6,700. That's coming up to half the cost of the whole camera. And the media module is still going to be faster than those ones. For the Sony Venice 2, just 1 terabyte of media costs £3,000. If that 8 terabytes is not enough for you though, you can of course buy another one of these media modules for £1,300. And Blackmagic have announced they're going to have a 16 terabyte version as well. So it's a lot of storage space and it's very fast. But what do you actually do with it once you've finished filming? One of the biggest pieces of feedback I've heard from customers is why don't they do a simple small card reader for it? Well, firstly, yeah, I agree. I would really like to see Blackmagic make that as an option. But it's clear that that's not actually how they are intending you to use this. They do make the large media dock, which is a rack-mounted 3-bay unit for bigger productions and studios. But for the average user, Blackmagic actually doesn't really ever intend you to take the media module out of the camera. 8 terabytes is more than enough for most filming days. And because the camera has a 10G Ethernet port, pulling data off the camera with that is very fast and easy. You do have to enable it on the camera though, which needs to be done on a computer. The details for this are in the manual, which I'll link to beneath this video. Once you've enabled this though, all you have to do is connect your camera to a network and it's going to show up on your computer as a network attached drive. It has to be a 10G network though, which most people won't have. So to get around this, we've been using this Sonnet Solo 10G, basically as a card reader. It's a simple little box which gives your computer a 10G Ethernet port. So if you turn off your other networks to avoid confusion and connect the computer to the camera with this and a Cat6 Ethernet cable, you can just copy the files right off. And it's fast. We copied across 760 gigabytes of footage in 13 minutes. This could be done at the end of the filming day, but if you have a laptop on set, it could easily be done while you work. The camera is fully functional while it's connected, so you could have it copying across while you're setting one scene up or lighting, for example, just by running an Ethernet cable to the camera. It does, of course, require a mentality shift, though. This is not the way any of us are used to working. And if this is off-putting to you, completely understand. Blackmagic are making a CF Express module as well, which should hopefully help. This replaces the media module and gives you 2 regular CF Express slots instead. So you can use a regular workflow and the same media cards as the Pixis or Cinema Camera 6K, which is nice. We don't know the full details yet on how much this is going to compromise what the camera can do though, as it's not ready yet. But we will test it when it is and let you know what frame rates and options we can get with some different CF Express cards. Unlike other Blackmagic cameras, you can't record onto external SSD drives right now. I'd love to see them add simple recording onto SSD drives just to give users some flexibility. It would be limited to the lower data rates or frame rates, but I would still like to see it. It'd be really useful for some work. I believe Blackmagic do intend to add this in a future firmware update. One of the big strengths of Blackmagic RAW is that it is very scalable with lots of different compression options available. So you can vary it massively depending on what you need for each project, which is especially important here. Because as you might expect, this camera is capable of some absolutely sky-high data rate options. But it can also be scaled back for small files too, while still being 12-bit RAW, of course. Blackmagic actually have a data rate calculator on their website, which is fantastic and very helpful. I wish every brand did that. But they use megabytes per second as their data format, while normally with most other cameras we'd be used to talking about megabits per second. And they might sound similar, but they are very definitely completely different, and that's really confusing for people. So we sat down and converted each measurement into this pretty full-on chart for those of us who are a bit more used to thinking in megabits per second. We're going to put a link to download this down in the description below. But let's go over some highlights. 12K 17:9 can go pretty crazy at 3:1, but put it to 8:1, which is what I would suggest most people actually use this in, and you get 3008 megabits a second, which is, yeah, still very, very high. But I reckon that's manageable for 12K RAW. You would expect it to be pretty high. At the complete other end of the scale, you go down to 4K constant quality Q5, and you get a variable data rate of between 71 and 170 megabits a second. And that's really low. The 4K H.265, which we normally record these videos in on our Canon C70, for example, is 135 megabits a second for perspective. And this is still 4K 12-bit RAW, of course, with all of this sensor's dynamic range, all of its color reproduction. And these compression options do a really good job of maintaining quality. Here's a side-by-side of that barn again, but with different quality modes. All of this is in 12K. Cropped right in, you can see there's definitely a difference, but perhaps not as much of a difference as you would first expect. So let's go over the physical design of the camera. I won't spend too long listing all the buttons and ports, as there are a lot here, and all of that is detailed online on Blackmagic's product page. Essentially though, it is a redesigned and souped up version of the URSA Mini Pro design. So if you've used one of those, you're going to feel at home here. Now, that body design on the URSA Mini Pro can feel a little bit overly chunky and large, if that's fair. But here, it feels a bit more reasonable for the camera to be this large and heavy, considering what this camera is capable of. It is large and heavy though, there is no getting around that. It's just under 4 kilograms for the body itself without any accessories on. For comparison, the Venice 2 is 4.3 kilograms and the Alexa 35 is 2.9. There's a lot more going on here than with those cameras though, mainly this flip out 5-inch screen and a second fixed one on the operator side as well. Now we've had a few customers say that it can feel a bit plasticky, and I know what they mean, but it's actually made of a strong magnesium alloy chassis with a carbon fiber polycarbonate composite skin over the top. So it's definitely not plasticky. Although, just like other URSA designs and actually the Pixis as well, the air vents on the top are open to the elements. So that is definitely something to keep in mind when working on location with this camera. The front is an interchangeable lens mount. In the box, it has a PL equipped, but there's also a locking EF mount included. There's then 2 optional mounts as well for LPL or for Hasselblad lenses. There's also a 3-pin Fisher RS port, 7-pin LEMO, USB-C for the viewfinder, and 2 built-in mics for scratch audio. The operator side feels the most similar to the URSA Mini Pro. Mostly the buttons here are the same, but that does mean we have the same frustration, that is when you flip that screen out, you can't see the most useful set of these buttons and you're going to have to operate from touch, which is frustrating. On the assistant side of the camera though, the URSA Cine is very different to the URSA Mini Pro. We now have another large 5-inch 1080p display here, which has full menu control, can show tools and overlays separately from the operator screen, and has a few other neat tricks up its sleeve, which we're going to go over shortly. This is really nice, and it makes a big difference, especially working in small teams. It means that your camera assistant, director, sound operator, or just anyone else can see what's going on in situations where you might not be running big external monitors. On the top are a row of mounting points, which is how you can attach the top handle, the air vents for cooling, which we just mentioned, and 2 XLR ports. Now these are the only audio inputs on the camera. There's no 3.5mm input here, just these 2 XLR ports, and they stick up in the air. There are then 2 more USB-C ports here as well. Now these ones are for controlling the settings on a computer or firmware updates, they're for power, or tethering your phone for data. On the back are the ports and the batteries. For ports, we have another USB-C. This one is the second viewfinder one for connecting either another viewfinder or the Pixis monitor would be perfect. There's 2 12G SDI outputs and a Genlock BNC for timecode. There's then the 10G Ethernet port, 24 volt DC mains power input, and a headphone jack. Then of course is the battery plate. Now Blackmagic let you choose your battery plate with the URSA Cine, but fitted by default in the box is a B-mount, which is what you are going to have to use to get the most from the camera. But there are optional plates which you can buy for either gold mount or V-Lock. But in the manual, Blackmagic say that if you use power solutions between 12 and 18 volts, i.e. a regular V-Lock battery, which is 14.4 volts, then frame rates above 60 frames per second are not going to be possible, and powering accessories over the camera's power outputs won't work either. There's also an interesting note about why this is. They say operating in the 24 to 34 voltage range is ideal for use with the URSA Cine, as the higher voltage reduces thermal losses, allowing for high frame rate recording and powering multiple accessories. So if you want everything this camera can do, you're going to have to be either plugged into mains, of course, as that's still an option, or running from B-mount batteries. And we like these ones from Swit. They're bi-voltage, they're drop proof, there's a little screen on the side to show their status, a couple of DTAP ports, even a little torch built in for working in the dark. They're also fast charge with Swit's charger. Something that's important to mention is that the camera actually comes in this nice hard case, which is very practical. Plus, of course, they have a full studio version of Resolve like their other cameras included. It also comes with this base plate and top handle. And the base plate is a nice one. It works with both 15 and 19mm rods, has a simple shoulder pad built in, and secures nicely onto an Arri dovetail plate. There's 2 rosettes either side for mounting your arms. It just gets the job done. Add to that the 8TB media module as well, and there is a lot of extra value here, all included with the camera purchase, which is very nice to see. You can also buy the camera as a package with the URSA Cine viewfinder, which for the extra price is something which I definitely would recommend to most customers. The viewfinder is excellent, connects simply over its locking USB-C cable, and has some control buttons on the top for record trigger, false color, magnify, and 3 custom assignable buttons. Another big area of innovation is one that Blackmagic are calling the first AC page. This is one of the main reasons which we have this large 5-inch touchscreen on the assistant side of the camera, and it's one of the best in-camera uses of Cook's Eye technology which we've seen yet. If you have a lens with Cook Eye technology attached, like this, you can press this lens button and get to this first AC page. This is very simple and shows you your lens information right there on the side of the camera, all automatically. We connect this Sigma 85mm and all the information is there straight away. Which lens, the focus distance, the iris, the zoom, and even the serial number of the lens. This all gets recorded, of course, as metadata into the clip, and it updates in real time while you work and pull focus. Plus, you can even set your marks right here on the screen. You can color code them and even use them when pulling focus. Setting this up is incredibly simple. Some lenses send all the information the camera needs on their focus and iris range right away, and some, like these Sigma lenses, send the positional data but not the whole range data. So all you have to do when you first connect each lens is move the focus and iris rings throughout their range, and the camera will just self-calibrate and just map it out for you automatically. And this then saves in camera and will be remembered the next time you put this exact same lens back on. And it's all really accurate. Set the lens to 4 foot and the camera says it's 4 foot. Just like the Pixis, Blackmagic have built support for their cloud functionality right into the camera. But here you get built-in Wi-Fi, which is very useful. We have a live stream where we go over all of the details of the cloud functionality within Resolve, so if you're interested, definitely give that a watch. But it's really powerful. We've been using it a lot, and these new cameras integrate perfectly into it, uploading proxy files while you're working directly into your Resolve project. They even have a whole section of the playback UI for managing this. It's one of the best implementations of cloud workflows in a camera which I've seen to date. In Blackmagic's manual, they have a complete guide on how to use this and set it up, but it's actually all really quite straightforward. For our product shoot in the showroom, we had the camera automatically uploading the proxy files over the Wi-Fi straight into our Resolve project. We then used those to do a quick assembly edit while we worked, which helped us decide what would work well as a sequence and what to film next. Then when we were finished, we ran a long Ethernet cable from the editing suite into the camera, copied across the full res files, and relinked them inside Resolve. So there's a huge amount to talk about with the URSA Cine 12K. But before we wrap up, I should mention the other URSA Cine cameras, as the 12K LF is certainly not all there is to talk about. There's also the URSA Cine 17K 65, which is on its way, and the URSA Cine Immersive, which is being designed as well. The 17K has a massive 65mm sensor, which is the same height as the 12K LF, but quite a bit wider. That means the 16:9 footage will be using a significantly larger sensor size than the 12K. Apart from that sensor, this is the same camera though as the 12K, but it is a really interesting one. This is a huge sensor. Apart from medium format cameras like the Fujifilm GFX models, there hasn't really been anything like this available on the market. There's the Alexa 65 of course, but that's a rental only camera, so this is pretty unique. There's then the URSA Immersive, which is a specialist VR version of the camera which they're developing in collaboration with Apple, presumably with the Apple Vision Pro headset in mind. This will use two built-in lenses, one for each eye, and capture them onto two 12K sensors, capturing an 8K readout per eye. This is going to be for cinematic 180-degree immersive content for VR headsets. So this could be narrative, it could be events like music or theatre. It's a really interesting new area. I think it's going to be great to see some real cinematic options for that space being developed. So those other URSA Cine models are of course exciting, but this 12K LF is going to be the main option for most people who are looking at the URSA Cine lineup. With a camera that does this many things differently, there's naturally going to have been a lot of questions from people raised. So hopefully this video has helped answer some of those for you. If you want to buy an URSA Cine or want to spend a bit of time with one yourself to see if it works for you in your own specific set of requirements, please do get in touch with the team here at ProAV and we would be very happy to help. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.